अब हम पढ़ेंगे बायोमोलिक्यूल्स का सेकेंड पार्ट। इस वाले में आपने पीछे पूरा पढ़ लिया था कि कैसे हमारा क्या हाउ टू एनालाइज केमिकल कंपाउंड्स कंपोजिशन के, हम केमिकल कंपोजिशन को कैसे एनालाइज करते हैं, और बेसिकली बायोमोलिक्यूल्स किसे कहते हैं। तो द कार्बन कंपाउंड्स दैट हैव वी गेट फ्रॉम द लिविंग टिश्यू कैन बी कॉल्ड बायोमोलिक्यूल्स, तब हम उसे बायोमोलिक्यूल्स कहते हैं। ठीक है, अब हम आगे स्टडी करेंगे। आई होप ये क्लियर होगा। अब यहाँ पे आपने कुछ स्ट्रक्चर के बारे में सिर्फ इंट्रोडक्शन लिया था, पूरा कंप्लीट नहीं हुआ था। तो सबसे पहला था आपका शुगर, जिसको हम कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स कहते हैं। इसका स्ट्रक्चर हम बना बना कर प्रैक्टिस करेंगे। सेकंड था आपका एमिनो एसिड। नेक्स्ट है आपका फॉस्फोलिपिड, लेथिन, कोलेस्ट्रॉल, फैट एंड ऑयल लिपिड्स। नेक्स्ट है आपका एडेनिन, प्यूरिन, एडिनोसाइन, एड्रेलिन एसिडिक, नाइट्रोजन बेस एंड न्यूक्लियोसाइड, न्यूक्लियोटाइड्स। ठीक है, डायग्रामेट्रिक रिप्रेजेंटेशन है ऑफ स्मॉल मॉलिक्यूलर वेट का ऑर्गेनिक कंपाउंड जो कि लिविंग टिश्यूज से हमें मिलता है। ठीक है, नेक्स्ट है आपका प्राइमरी एंड सेकेंडरी मेटाबोलाइट्स। ये टॉपिक बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट है, इससे डायरेक्ट आपके क्वेश्चन आते हैं, तो आपको इसको छोड़ना नहीं है। अब जितनी बार इसको रीड करोगे उतनी ही अच्छे से आपको ये लर्न होता जाएगा। तो a structure and a possible synthesizing them. If one were to make a list of a biomolecule, such a list would have thousands of organic compounds, including amino acid. थाउजेंड ऑफ कंपाउंड में कौन से आपके अमीनो एसिड है, शुगर एक्सेट्रा है। फॉर अ रीजन दैट गिव इन अ सेक्शन 9.10, ये जो एक टेबल है जो कि आप आगे पढ़ोगे। वी कॉल दिस बायोमोलिक्यूल्स एज अ मेटाबोलाइट्स, इसको डायरेक्ट आप मेटाबोलाइट्स कह सकते हो। इन एनिमल टिश्यू वन notice that the presence of such a category, a compound shown in 9.1, these are called a primary metabolites. However, when one analyzes plants, fungal and microbial cells, one would see 1,000 of compounds other than this called a primary metabolites. एग्जाम्पल के लिए है एल्कलॉइड्स, फ्लेवोनॉइड्स, रबर, इसेंशियल ऑयल, एंटीबायोटिक्स, कलर पिगमेंट्स, सेंट्स, गम्स, स्पाइसेस। दिस आर कॉल्ड अ सेकेंडरी मेटाबोलाइट्स। जो हमें प्लांट से मिलता है, जो प्लांट के किसी काम का नहीं होता, बट वो हम अपने यूज़ के लिए क्या करते हैं, जो प्लांट से हम ले लेते हैं। ठीक है, तो वो सारे आ जाते हैं आपके सेकेंडरी मेटाबोलाइट्स में। While primary metabolites have a identification function and play known role in a normal physiological process, we do not at the moment understand the role or function of all the secondary metabolites in the host organization. However, many of them are useful to human welfare. Example के लिए rubber, drug, spices, scents and pigments. Some secondary metabolites have a ecological importance in their later chapter. यहाँ पर ये टेबल देखो आप, जो कि 9.3 है। ये पूरे क्या है, आपके सेकेंडरी मेटाबोलाइट्स है। जैसे कि आपका पिगमेंट है, कैरोटीनॉइड्स, एंथेनोसाइन, फिर है एल्केनॉइड, मॉर्फिन, कोडेनोसाइन, ये डायरेक्ट पूरे ऑयल एक्सेट्रा। फिर है आपका टॉक्सिन, एब्रेनरिकिन के बायोमोलिक्यूल्स। देयर इज अ फीचर टू biomolecules में there is a one feature common to all those compound in the acid soluble pool. They have a molecular weight ranging from around 1800 Dalton approximately. The acid insoluble fraction has only 4 type of organic compound. इसके पास सिर्फ 4 टाइप के organic compound हमें मिलते हैं. The exception of a lipid have a molecular weight in of 10,000 Dalton and above. For this very reason, biomolecules, chemical compounds found in a living organism, are two types. One, those which have molecular weight less than 1,000 Dalton and are usually referred to as a micromolecules or a simply biomolecules, while those which are found in the acid insoluble fraction are called a macromolecules, biomolecules. The molecules in the insoluble fraction, with the exception of a lipid, are a polymeric substance. Compound are the present in the ये आपके किस में प्रेजेंट होते हैं? कंपाउंड आर प्रेजेंट नॉट ओनली सच बट ऑल्सो अरेंज इनटू अ स्ट्रक्चर लाइक अ, तब वो छोटे छोटे पीस में क्या होते हैं? ब्रेक हो जाते हैं, यानी कि टूट जाते हैं। ठीक है, नेक्स्ट है विसल्स विच आर नॉट अ वाटर सॉल्युबल। एक वाटर सॉल्युबल नहीं है, देयर फॉर दिस मेम्ब्रेन फ्रेगमेंट्स इन द फॉर्म ऑफ अ विसल्स get separated along with the acid insoluble pool and hence in the macromolecule fraction. Lipid are not strictly macromolecules. The acid soluble pool represents roughly the cytoplasmic composition. The macromolecules from cytoplasm and organelles become the acid insoluble fraction. Together they represent the entire chemical composition of a living tissue of organism. In summary, we represent the chemical composition of a living tissue from the abundance point view of arrangement. Then a class-wise, we observe that the water is the most abundant chemical in the living organism. आपको बोला है कि वाटर एक अबंडेंट केमिकल है। पीछे आपने एक और चीज पढ़ा था, अमीनो एसिड आर ऑर्गेनिक कंपाउंड का नहीं, ये भी नहीं था। एक और पॉइंट था जो आपको मुझे बताना था, शायद आगे है, तो इस पॉइंट को नोट कर लो आप, ये अंडरलाइन कर लो। वाटर इज द मोस्ट अबंडेंट केमिकल है, केमिकल वर्ड को ध्यान रखना क्योंकि इससे रिलेटेड एक और पॉइंट है, लिविंग इन द ऑर्गेनिज्म। फिर आता है आपका प्रोटीन। Protein are a polypeptide. They are linear chain of a amino acid linked by a peptide bonds as shown in figure this. Each protein is a polymer of amino acid, as there are 20 type of amino acid: alanine, cysteine, proline, tryptophan, lysine. A protein is a heteropolymer and do not homopolymer. ये जो होते हैं एक हेट्रोपॉलीमर है, होमोपॉलीमर नहीं। a homopolymer has also has only one type of monomer. तो जो आपके होमोपॉलीमर होते हैं ना, वो क्या होते हैं? सिर्फ एक ही टाइप के आपके मोनोमर होते हैं, रिपीटिंग n number of time. This information about the amino acid content is important as the later in your nutrition lesson you will learn that a certain amino acid are essential for our healthy and they have to be supplied through our diet. Hence, dietary protein are the source of essential amino acid. Therefore, amino acid can be essential or non-essential. ये आपके essential भी हो सकते हैं, non-essential भी हो सकते हैं. Therefore, amino acid can be essential or non-essential. The latter of those which our body can make while we get essential amino acid through our diet. Food protein carry out many function in living organism. Some transport nutrition across cell membrane. Some fight infections organisms, some are hormones, some are enzymes. इस वाले में आपको बताया है कि एच टू एक मोस्ट अबंडेंट एसेंशियल केमिकल तो फाउंड होता है लिविंग सेल में, पर जो वाटर में है सेलुलर का जो मास है कितना कंटेन करता है। ठीक है, ये इस वाले टेबल में यही बताया गया है। तो सबसे पहला आता है वाटर जिसमें 70 to 90% होता है। प्रोटीन है उसमें ये एक, हाँ यही मुझे आपको बताना था कि मोस्ट अबंडेंट एक बायोमोलिक्यूल्स है प्रोटीन, जिसमें परसेंटेज ऑफ टोटल सेलुलर मास होता है 10 to 15। फिर है आपका कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स जिसमें होता है 3, लिपिड में 2, न्यूक्लियस एसिड में 5 to 7 और आयंस में ओनली 1। ठीक है, देन कोलेजन इज द मोस्ट अबंडेंट प्रोटीन इन अ बायोमोलिक्यूल्स। फिर आता है कोलेजन इज द मोस्ट अबंडेंट प्रोटीन है, ध्यान रखिए प्रोटीन है in an animal world, and rubisco biosphere. Carboxylic oxygen rubisco is the most abundant protein in the whole of biosphere. अब पूरे बायोस्फेयर में इससे 2-3 बार क्वेश्चन आपके जब स्कूल के एग्जाम हुए होंगे या होने वाले होंगे तो ऐसे क्वेश्चन पूछे जाते हैं. ये ऑलरेडी रिपीटेड वाला टॉपिक है. ठीक है, एक बार और अंडरलाइन कर लो, इंपॉर्टेंट लिख लो कि जो पूरे बायोस्फीयर में है ना, मोस्ट अबंडेंट प्रोटीन है कौन सा, रुबिस्को. फिर आता है आपका पॉलीसेक्राइड. द एसिड इनसॉल्युबल प्लेट ऑल्सो हैज अ पॉलीसेक्राइड कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स एज द another class of macromolecules. Polysaccharide are long chain of a sugar. पॉलीसेक्राइड जो है शुगर का एक लॉन्ग चेन है. Their threads literally a cotton thread containing different monosaccharides as a building block. For example, cellulose is a polymeric polysaccharide consisting of only one type of monosaccharide like a glucose. Cellulose is a homopolymer. Starch is a variant of this but present as a storehouse of energy. Plant tissue animal have another variant called a glycogen. Insulin is a polymer of a fraction in a polysaccharide chain, say glycogen. The right end called the reducing end and the left end is called non-reducing end. It has a branch as shown in the from a cartoon. Starch from a helical secondary structure. In fact, starch can hold I2 molecule in the helical protein. The starch I2 is a blue color. Cellulose does not contain complex helix and hence cannot hold I2. यहाँ पे डायमेट्रिक रिप्रेजेंटेशन है प्रोटीन ऑफ ग्लाइकोजन का. इसको और इजी तरीके से भी बनाया जा सकता है. ठीक है, तो मैं आपको ये दूसरे वाले में बनाकर समझाऊंगी. Plant cell wall are made up of a cellulose, paper made from a plant pulp and cotton fiber of cellulosic. There are a more complex polysaccharide in nature. Nature में और भी complex type के जो आपके polysaccharide है present है. They have as a building blocks amino sugar and a chemical modified sugar. Glucosamine and acetyl glycosamine, glycosamine, etc. Exoskeleton of a arthropoda, for example, have a complex polysaccharide called a chitin. These complex polysaccharides are a heteropolymers. और ये आपके किस टाइप के होते हैं, एक हेट्रोपॉलीमर्स की तरह होते हैं. उसके बाद आपसे पूछा गया है न्यूक्लिक एसिड. The type of macromolecule that one would find in an acid insoluble fraction of any living tissue is the nucleic acid. These are a polynucleotide together with a polysaccharide and a polypeptide. This compression is the true macromolecular fraction of any living tissue or cell. For a nucleic acid, the building blocks is a nucleotide. A nucleotide has a 3 chemically distinct composition. One is a heterolytic and another compound. The second is a monosaccharide and the third is phosphoric acid or a phosphate. As you notice figure 9.1, the heterolytic compound in a nucleic acid are the nitrogenous base name adenine, guanine, uralic, cytosine, and a substitute purine, while the rest are a substituted pyramids. The skeletal heterocyclic ring is called purine. Respectively, the sugar found in a polynucleotides is an entire ribose, a monosaccharides, pentose, or a 2-deoxyribo. A nucleic acid containing deoxyribose is called deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA, while that which contain ribose is called a ribonucleic acid. RNA. फिर है स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ प्रोटीन. प्रोटीन का स्ट्रक्चर बेसिकली कैसा होता है, Protein, as I mentioned earlier, are heteropolymers containing a molecular formula. सोडियम क्लोराइड, मैग्नीशियम क्लोराइड एक्सेट्रा है. ऑर्गेनिक केमिस्ट्री ऑलवेज रिटन इन अ टू dimensional view of molecule while representing the structure of a molecules. बेंजीन है, नेफ्थलीन है. Physician conjure up the three-dimensional view of a molecular structure while the biologist describe the protein structure at a fold level. This sequence of amino acid, the positional information in a protein, which is the first amino acid, which is second, and so on, is called a primary structure of a protein. A protein is imaginated as a line, the left and represented by the first amino acid, and the right and represented by the last amino acid. The first amino acid is called N-terminal acid, the last amino acid called C-terminal acid. दोनों फर्स्ट को एन से, लास्ट को सी से रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं. डज नॉट exist through an extend rigid rod. The thread is folded in the from helix. Similarly to a revolving strain case of occurs only some primary of a protein. Protein of a protein thread arrangement in the form of helix in a protein. Only right-handed helix are observed. Other regions of a protein thread are folded into other form in a what is called a secondary structure. In addition, the long protein chain is also folded upon tertiary structure. This gives a three-dimensional view of protein. Tertiary structure necessary for the many biological activity of protein. Some protein are a assembly from more than one polypeptide or subunit. The manner in which this individual folded polypeptide or subunit are arranged with respect to each other, linear, straight, or a sphere होगा, sphere arranged on upon each other in the form of a cube, plate, etc. is a architecture of a protein, otherwise called a quaternary structure of a protein. यहाँ पे जो है प्राइमरी स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ अ प्रोटीन को इस डायग्राम में दिखाया गया है. हाइपोथेटिकल प्रोटीन NNC आपको बताया गया जहाँ से स्टार्ट होगा वहाँ N से रिप्रेजेंट करा जाएगा, जो लास्ट वाला होगा उसको C से प्रेजेंट करा जाए किया होगा. और ये जो आपको येलो पार्ट दिखाया जा रहा है ये है आपके एमिनो एसिड रेजिड्यू. यहाँ पे है सेरीन, साइटिनिन, ट्राइसिन एंड ग्वानिन एसिड. SCYE से रिप्रेजेंट किया गया है, ये इसका फॉर्मूला है. और सेकंड डायग्राम एक नीचे दिखाया गया है आपकी बुक में, जो कि कार्टून शोइंग है अ सेकेंडरी स्ट्रक्चर एंड अ टर्शियरी स्ट्रक्चर. ये है प्रोटीन के स्ट्रक्चर. ठीक है, अब हम अडल्ट में देखें. द अडल्ट ह्यूमन हीमोग्लोबिन कंसिस्ट ऑफ 4 सब यूनिट. 2 these are identical each other, hence 2 substituent of alpha type and 2 substituent of beta together constitute the human hemoglobin HB. hemoglobin को ही हम HB से रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं. नेचर ऑफ अ ब्लड लिंकेज monomers in a polymers. In polypeptides or a protein, amino acid are linked by a peptide bond which is formed when the carboxylic group of one amino acid react with the amino NH2 group of the next amino acid with the elimination of water mitotic. The process is called dehydration. In a polysaccharide, the individual monosaccharides are linked by a glycosidic bond. This bond is also formed by a dehydration. This bond is formed between the carbon atom of 2 adjacent monosaccharides in a nucleic acid as a phosphate. Moieticides link the 3 carbon of 1 sugar of 1 nucleotides to the 5 carbon of a sugar of the succeed nucleotide. The bond between the phosphate and hydroxyl group of a sugar and ester bond. As there is a one such ester bond on either side is called a phosphodiester bond. और इसी को हम कहते हैं फॉस्फोडाइएस्टर बॉन्ड. न्यूक्लिक एसिड exhibited a wide variety of a secondary structure. For example, one of the secondary structure exhibited by the DNA is the famous Western Crick model. This model was the DNA exists as a double helix. The two standard of a polynucleic acid are a antiparallel that is run in the opposite direction. The backbone is formed by the sugar phosphate sugar chain. The nitrogen base are projected more or less perpendicular to this backbone but face inside. A and G one standard compulsory base pair. ये डायग्राम इंक्लूड करता है सेकेंडरी स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ डीएनए को और ये डबल हेलिक्स है और इसको हम कहते हैं वेस्टर्न क्रिक मॉडल. With D and C representative on their stand, there are two hydrogen. यहाँ पर आपके दो हाइड्रोजन हैं. Bond between A and T. There 3 hydrogen bond between G and C. Each standard appear like a helical. Either each step of ascent is represented by a pair of base at each step of ascent. Structural turn in 36-degree. One full turn and helical stand would involve 10 step and 10 base pair. Attempted drawing the line diagram, the pitch would be 34 angstrom. The rise per base pair would be 3.4 angstrom. This from of a DNA with the above mentioned silent feature is called bDNA. In higher classes, बेकार है इसको छोड़ो. Dynamic state of a body constitute concept of metabolism. What we have learned till now. अब तक हमने क्या पढ़ा? What we have learned till now is that a living organism, be a simple bacterial cells, a protozoans, a plant or animal, कंटेन 1000 ऑफ ऑर्गेनिक कंपाउंड. ये सारे 1000 ऑफ ऑर्गेनिक कंपाउंड को अपने पास कंटेन करते हैं, मतलब रखते हैं. दीज कंपाउंड और बायोमोलिक्यूल्स आर प्रेजेंट इन अ सर्टेन कंसंट्रेशन एक्सप्रेस्ड एज अ मोल्स, सेल्स और मोल्स, liter etc. One of the greatest discoveries ever made was the observation that all these biomolecules have a turnover. This means that they are constantly being changed into some other biomolecules and also made from some other biomolecules. This breaking and making is through chemical reaction constantly occurring in living organism. Together, all these chemical reactions are called metabolism. Each of a metabolic reaction resulted in the transformation of a biomolecule. A few examples such as a metabolic transformation are a removal of carbon dioxide from the amino acid, making an amino acid into a amine, removal of amino group in nucleotide base, hydrolysis of glycoside bond in a disaccharide, etc. We can list 10 and 1000 of such example. Majority of these metabolic reaction do not occur in isolation but are always linked to some other reaction. In other words, metabolites are converted into each other in a series linked reaction called a metabolic pathway. This metabolic pathway are similar to the automobile traffic in the city. This pathway are either linear or a circular. This pathway carry cross each other. There are a traffic junction. Flow of a metabolites through a metabolic pathway has a definite rate and a direction like automobiles traffic. This metabolites follow is called a dynamic state of a body constitute करता है. What is the most important is that the interlinked metabolic traffic is a very smooth and without a single report mashup of for a healthy condition. Another feature of this metabolic reaction is the every chemical reaction is a catalyzed reaction. This is no uncatalyzed metabolic conversion in the living system. Even carbon dioxide dissolving in a water. Carbon dioxide किस में dissolve करता है? Water में. A physical process is a catalyzed reaction living system. The catalyst which has in the rate of a given metabolic conversion are also protein. This protein which catalytic power are named enzyme, और इसका एंजाइम का नाम दिया गया है मेटाबॉलिक basis for a living. Metabolic pathway can lead to be a more complex structure from a simpler structure. For example, acetic acid because cholesterol, or lead a simple structure from complex structure. For example, glucose become a lactic acid in our skeletal muscles from case are called a biosynthetic pathway or anabolic pathway. The latter constitute degradation and hence are called a catabolic pathway. Anabolic pathway as expanded consume energy assembly for a protein from amino acid require energy input. On the other hand, catabolic pathway lead to the release of energy. For example, when the glucose is dragged to a lactic acid in our skeletal muscles, energy is liberated. This metabolic pathway from glucose to a lactic acid, which occur in 10 metabolic step, is called a glycolysis. Living organisms have learned to trap this energy liberated during degeneration and store in the from a chemical bond as and when the need to. This energy utilized for a biosynthetic, osmotic and mechanical work that we form. The most important from energy currency in living system in the bond energy, a chemical called adenosine ट्रिप्सोफेट ATP. ये एक यूनिट भी आप बहुत आगे जाके यूज करोगे या फिर आपने पहले भी देखा होगा इस वाले टॉपिक को, ठीक है। फिर आता है द लिविंग स्टेट। एट दिस लेवल At this level, you must understand that the 10 and 1000 of chemical compound in a living organism, otherwise called a metabolites or a biomolecules कहा जाता है, are represent concentration characteristic of each of them. For example, the blood concentration of a glucose is normally healthy individual is 4.5 to 5 mm, while that a hormones would be a nanograms ml. The most important fact, इसमें से मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्ट क्या है, of a biological system is that all living organisms exist in a steady state characterized by concentration of each of these biomolecules. These biomolecules are in a metabolic flux. Any chemical or a physical process move spontaneously to equilibrium. The steady state is a non-equilibrium state. One should remember from physics that system at equilibrium cannot perform work as living organism work continuously. They cannot afford to reach equilibrium, hence the living state is a non-equilibrium state to be also a perform work. Living process is a constant effort to prevent falling into equilibrium. This is achieved by energy input. Metabolic provide a mechanism for a production of energy, hence the living state and metabolism are symptoms. Without metabolism cannot be a living state. Okay, now next you will be learn enzymes. Let me fix my mic. Okay. Enzymes, almost all enzyme protein, these are almost all enzyme or protein. There are some nucleic acid that behave like an enzyme. These are called a riboenzyme. कुछ ऐसे आपके प्रोटीन होते हैं या न्यूक्लिक एसिड होते हैं जो एंजाइम की तरह बिहेव करते हैं, उसको राइबोएंजाइम कहा जाता है, ठीक है। One can depict an enzyme by link diagram. An enzyme, like any protein, has a primary structure, that is amino acid sequence of a protein. An enzyme, like any protein, has the secondary and the tertiary structure. When you look at tertiary structure, you will be that the backbone of the protein chain folded upon itself. Chain crisscross itself and hence a many creases of a pockets are made. One such a pocket is that the active site. An active site is an enzyme is creative or pocket into a which the substrate fits. Thus, enzymes through their activities sites catalyze a reaction at a time rate. Enzyme catalysts differ from inorganic catalysts in many way, but one major difference need a mention: inorganic catalysts work efficiently at a high temperature and high pressure, while enzymes get damaged at high temperature, say above 40 degrees Celsius. However, enzyme is isolated from organisms who normally lived under extremely high temperature. Hotman and a solvent spring are stable and retain their catalytic power even at high temperature upon 80 to 90 degrees Celsius. Thermal stability is thus an important quality of such enzyme isolated from thermalic organisms. उसके बाद आता है आपका chemical reaction. How do we understand these enzymes? Let us first understand a chemical reaction. Chemical compounds undergo two types of changes. A physical change, simply refer to a change in a shape without breaking bonds. This is a physical process. Okay. Another physical process is a chemical change in a state or a matter. When ice metal into a water, or when the water become a vapor state, these are also a physical process. However, when the bonds are broken, जब जो बॉन्ड है वो ब्रेक हो जाते हैं कि टूट जाते हैं, एंड द न्यू बॉन्ड फॉर्म, तब एक नया बॉन्ड बनता है ड्यूरिंग द ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन. दिस विल बी कॉल्ड अ केमिकल रिएक्शन. तब इसको हम केमिकल रिएक्शन कहते हैं. BaOH के साथ रिएक्शन हुआ H2SO4 के साथ, ठीक है. तब ये ब्रेन जो न्यू हमारा ट्रांसफर होके न्यू कंपाउंड बना BaSO4 and 2H2O. In an organic chemical reaction, similarly hydrolysis of starch into glucose is glucose is an organic chemical reaction. Rate of physical or a chemical process refer to the amount of a product from per unit time. It can be expressed rate को delta P divided by delta T से represent करते हैं. Rate can also called a velocity. Rate को हम also velocity if the direction is specified. Rate of a physical and chemical process are influenced by the temperature among other factors. A general rule thumb is the rate a double or decrease by a half. तब वो half decrease भी हो सकता है. For every 10 degree charge, earlier direction catalyzed reaction process at the rate vastly higher than from uncatalyzed one. When the enzyme catalyzed reaction are observed, the rate would be vastly higher than the same but uncatalyzed reaction. For example, कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड का रिएक्शन वाटर के साथ करा था, कार्बोनिक एनहाइड्राइड हुआ तो कार्बोनिक एसिड बनेगा H2CO3. इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ अ एंजाइम दिस रिएक्शन इज वेरी स्लो. अभी तक ये ना बहुत ही स्लो है क्योंकि यहाँ पे एंजाइम की कमी है. with about 200 molecules of H2CO3 being formed in an hour. 1 घंटे में अप्रॉक्स बहुत ही 200 ml molecules बन पाता है. However, by using the enzyme present within a cytoplasm called carbonic anhydride, the reaction speed dramatically with 600,000 molecule being from every second. लेकिन जब हम इसमें एंजाइम मिला देते हैं तो पर सेकेंड इसमें 600,000 molecule फॉर्म होता है. The enzyme has accelerated the reaction rate by amount 10 million time. जिसमें एंजाइम है एक्सेलरेट करता है रिएक्शन को 10 10 million time speed से. The power of enzyme is incredible indeed. There are 1,000 of type of enzyme, each catalyze unique chemical or a metabolic reaction, a multi-step chemical reaction. When each of the step is catalyzed by the same enzyme complex for a different enzyme is called a metabolic pathway. For example, अगर ग्लूकोज है तो प्यूरिक एसिड बना ऑक्सीजन के साथ रिएक्शन करके is actually a metabolic pathway in which glucose become pyruvic acid through a 10 different enzyme catalyzed metabolic reaction. When you study a representation of a chapter 14 उस वाले में आप और information दिया है. Stage you should know that a metabolic pathway with one or two additional reaction give rise to a variety of metabolic and a product in our skeletal muscles under metabolic condition. Lactic acid form under normal aerobic condition. Puric acid is formed in yeast during fermentation. The same pathway lead to be a production of ethanol, alcohol. Hence डिफरेंट कंडीशन डिफरेंट प्रोडक्ट आर पॉसिबल. तो उसमें डिफरेंट आपके प्रोडक्ट भी मिल सकते हैं, इसकी पॉसिबिलिटी है. हाउ डू एंजाइम बीइंग अबाउट सच हाई रेट ऑफ अ केमिकल कन्वर्जन? टू अंडरस्टैंड दिस वी शुड स्टडी एंजाइम अ लिटिल मोर. हमें एंजाइम को और थोड़ा ज़्यादा पढ़ने की ज़रूरत है. वी हैव ऑलरेडी अंडरस्टूड एन आइडिया एंड एक्टिव साइट द केमिकल और मेटाबॉलिक कन्वर्जन refer to a reaction. The chemical which is converted into a product is called a substrate. तब उसको substrate कहा जाता है. Enzyme that is protein with this three-dimensional structure including an active site convert substrate S into a product जो आप P से represent करोगे symbolically. This can be despite as S to P. It is now understood that the substrate S has a bind the enzyme its active site within a given cleft or a pocket. This substrate has a diffuse toward the active site. There is thus an obligatory formation of an ES complex. E जो आपके होते हैं stand for enzyme. This complex formation is a transient phenomenon during the state where the substrate is bound to the enzyme active site. A new structure of the substrate called a transition state structure is formed very soon after the expect bond breaking, making is a complex. The product is released from the active site. In the other word, the structure of a substrate get transformed into a structure of a product. The primary pathway. This transformation must go through the so-called transition state structure. There could be a many more alternate structure state between the stable substrate and the product. Implicate in the statement is the fact that all other intermediate structural state are unstable. Stability is something related to energy status of the molecules or of the structure. Hence, when we look at this pictorial through a graph, it look like something as the y-axis. कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ एक्टिवेशन एनर्जी के बारे में बताया जा रहा है. यहाँ पे प्रोटीन एनर्जी दिखाया गया है, नीचे में आपके प्रोग्रेस है रिएक्शन के. तो यहाँ पे जो बिल्कुल सीधी लाइन है वो तो सबस्ट्रेट है, ठीक है. और ये जो छोटी सी लाइन है वो आपको दिखा रहा है एक्टिवेशन एनर्जी. पहले इतनी थी, फिर एक्टिवेशन एनर्जी विदाउट एंजाइम. और ये वाली विदाउट एंजाइम है, ये विद एंजाइम है. ये ट्रांजिशन के भी स्टेट है. द वाई एक्सिस रिप्रेजेंट द पोटेंशियल एनर्जी. Contain the x-axis represent the progression of structural transformation of state through the transition state. You would notice the energy level difference between S and P. तब आप S और P के जो डिफरेंस है उन दोनों को आप चेक कर सकते हो, ठीक है. One need to always supply energy by heating in order to form the product. However, where it is the exothermic or a spontaneous reaction or an endothermic or energy requiring reaction. The S has go through as much higher energy state or a transition state. The difference in average energy constant of S from that of this transition state is called activation energy. Enzymes eventually bring down this energy barrier, making the transition of S to P more easy. Nature of enzyme action. Each enzyme E has a substrate binding site of a molecule so that the highly reactive enzyme substrate complex is produced. This complex is short-lived in a dissociate into a product P. The uncharged enzyme with an intermediate formation of the enzyme product complex. The formation of the ES complex is essential for the catalyze. The The catalytic cycle of enzyme action can be described as the following step. First, substrate को bind करेगा active site के साथ of enzyme fitting into active site. The binding of a substrate including the enzyme to alert its shape fitting more tightly around the substrate. The activate site of enzyme now in a closed primary of the substrate break the chemical bond of a substrate and the new enzyme product complex is formed. The enzyme released the product of the reaction and the free enzyme is released to bind another molecule of the substrate and run through the catalytic cycle once again. Factor affecting enzyme. The the activity of an enzyme can be affected by a change in the condition which can be alterate the tertiary structure of the protein. This include temperature. टेम्परेचर को इंक्लूड करता है pH change in substrate concentration of a binding specific chemical through the regulator regulate its activity. Temperature and pH enzyme generally function is a narrow range of a temperature and pH. Each enzyme in show is a highly active and highest activity at the particular temperature and pH called optimum temperature and optimum pH. Activity decline both below and above the optimum value. Low temperature pressure preserve the enzyme in a temporarily inactive state where the higher temperature destroy enzymatic activity because the protein are denatured by heat. यहाँ पे डायग्राम में दिखाया गया of changing pH temperature and a concentration of a substrate enzyme. यहाँ पे इसका pH यहाँ पे temperature को mention किया गया है. सेकेंड वाले जो ये आपका डायग्राम है ये concentration of a substrate on enzyme activity. यहाँ पे velocity of reaction है जो कि V से आपको ग्राफ में दिखाया गया है. Concentration of a substrate. With the increase in a substrate concentration, the velocity of enzymatic reaction raise the first. The reaction utilize ultimately which is not exceed by any further raise in concentration of the substrate. This is because the enzyme जहाँ पे because आया ना वहाँ पे सभी NCERT के लाइन को अंडरलाइन करो क्योंकि यहाँ से एसेसरेशन और रीजन का जो क्वेश्चन है वो बन जाता है इसीलिए. ठीक है. This is because enzyme molecules are fewer than the substrate molecule and after जैसे कि आपने फ्रॉग में भी पढ़ा था after structure of these molecules there are no free enzyme molecules to bind with the additional substrate molecules. The activity of an enzyme is also sensitive to representation of a specific chemical that bind to enzymes. When the binding of the chemical shut off enzyme activity, the process is called inhibition. The chemical is called Inhibitor. When the inhibitor is closely resemble the substrate is a molecular structure and inhibited the activity of the enzyme, it is known as the competitive inhibitor due to its a close structural similarity with the substrate. The inhibitor competes with the substrate for the substrate binding site of the enzyme. Consequently, the substrate cannot bind, and as a result, the enzyme action decline. Example: inhibition inhibition of a succinate dehydrogenase by a malonate which closely resemble the substrate. Succinate in a structure. Such a competitive inhibitor are often used in the control of a bacterial pathogen. फिर होता है आपका classification and nomenclature of enzyme. Thousand of enzyme has been dissolved, isolated and studied. Most of the enzyme have been classified into a different group based on their type of reaction. The catalyzed enzyme. Enzyme are divided into 6 classes with 4 to 13 subclasses and named accordingly by 4-digit number. Oxidoreduces dehydrogenases enzyme which catalyze oxido reduction between two substrate S and S dash. एग्जाम्पल में S reduced plus S dash oxidized, तो आपको बना S oxidized plus X reduced. Transformation enzyme catalyzing transfer of a group G other than hydrogen between a pair of a substrate S, जो कि बनेगा S minus G plus S plus G dash minus G. Hydrolysis enzyme catalyzing हाँ पूछो सीमा, क्या है आपका डाउट? सीमा खैनाल पूछो, आपको क्या पूछना है? यह आपका बायोमोलिक्यूल्स का चैप्टर चल रहा है जिसमें रीडिंग है, उसके बाद आप नोट्स पढ़ोगे, उसके बाद आप क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करोगे. ये NCERT 11th के लिए भी हो सकता है और आप नीट के लिए भी पढ़ोगे, तब ये भी आपको लाइन टू लाइन पढ़ना है. ठीक है, जो भी पूछना आप कमेंट सेक्शन में पूछ सकते हो. सॉरी मैंने आपका ये लाइव का चैट देखा नहीं. सेकेंड आप आ जाओ हाइड्रोलाइसिस पे. ठीक है, जिसमें H2 को रिमूवल होता है. एंजाइम कैटालाइज हाइड्रोलाइसिस ऑफ एस्टर एंड पेप्टाइड ग्लाइकोसाइडिक, जिसमें कार्बन कार्बन बॉन्ड बनता है और C हेलाइड ऑफ अ PN बॉन्ड का होता है, लाइसिन होता है. एंजाइम दैट कैटालाइज रिमूवल ऑफ अ ग्रुप फ्रॉम सबस्ट्रेट बाय अ मैकेनिज्म अदर देन हाइड्रोलाइसिस लिविंग डबल बॉन्ड होता है. ओके, नेक्स्ट में है आइसोमेरिज्म. Isomers include all enzyme catalyzing interconversion of a optical, geometrical और a positional. Isomerism होता है. Isomers ligase होता है. Enzyme catalyze are linked together of a two compound. Example के लिए enzyme which catalyzing joining carbon oxygen, कार्बन के साथ सल्फर, कार्बन नाइट्रोजन, फॉस्फोरस ऑक्सीजन एक्सेट्रा बॉन्ड बनता है. कोफैक्टर इसके क्या है? एंजाइम आर अ कंपोज्ड ऑफ वन और सेवरल पॉलीपेप्टाइड चेन. ये आपको ऑलरेडी पता है. हाउएवर देयर आर अ नंबर ऑफ केसेस इन विच नॉन अ प्रोटीन कॉन्स्टिट्यूट कॉल्ड कोफैक्टर आर बाउंडेड to the enzyme to make the enzyme catalytically active. In these instances, the protein of the enzyme is called the apioenzyme. Three kind of cofactor may be identified: the phosphatic group coenzyme and metal ion. Prosthetic groups are organic compound are distinguished from other cofactors in that they are tightly bounded to apoenzyme. For example, in the peroxide are a catalyst which catalyze the breakdown of a hydrogen peroxide of water and oxygen. Hem is a prosthetic group and it is a part of an active site of the enzyme. Coenzymes are also organic compound, but their association with the apoenzyme is only transition, usually जो आपके होते हैं occurring during the occur of a catalyst. Furthermore, coenzymes serve as a cofactor in number of a different enzyme catalyzed reaction. This essential chemical compound of a many coenzyme are a vitamin. Example के लिए coenzyme nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide and a NADAP contain पी फॉस्फेट के नाम से भी जानते हो contain the vitamin niacin. A number of enzymes require metals ion for their activity, which form coordination bond with side chain and the active site at the same time from one or more coordination bond with the substrate. Example के लिए है zinc is a factor of the proteolytic enzyme carboxypeptides. Catalytic acid is lowest when the cofactor is removed from the enzyme, which testified they play a critical role in the catalytic activity of the enzyme. इस वाले में आपको जब मैं नोट्स दूंगी उसमें बहुत अच्छे से और समझ में आ जाएगा. चलो अभी के लिए हम इतना ही रखते हैं. जिसको कोई क्वेश्चन पूछना हो आप कमेंट सेक्शन में डाल देना. चाहे तो मैं नोट्स की वीडियो ही बनाकर डाल दूंगी, ठीक है, क्योंकि आप पीडीएफ में तो पढ़ते नहीं हो. ओके बाय बाय, मिलते हैं नेक्स्ट वीडियो में. ओके तो मैं बता देती हूँ नेक्स्ट चैप्टर हम कौन सा पढ़ने वाले हैं, ठीक है. आपका एनिमल किंगडम हो गया, स्ट्रक्चर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन इन एनिमल हो गया, इसमें आपका बायोमोलिक्यूल्स हो गया, रेस्पायरेशन नहीं, प्लांट ग्रोथ नहीं, डाइजेशन, एब्जॉर्प्शन ये तो आपके सिलेबस में नहीं है. ब्रीथ इन एंड एक्सचेंजेस ऑफ गैस ये भी आपका हो चुका है. हम पढ़ेंगे बॉडी फ्लूइड एंड सर्कुलेशन नेक्स्ट वाले वीडियो में, ठीक है. ओके बाय बाय.